Hey Mark, really stoked to spend a second talking about low back pain or back pain, right? So first of all, let's establish a couple rules. If you have back pain, you are likely a human being, and more likely you're an athlete who lifts some weights once in a while. So what we want to appreciate is that back pain or pain in general does not mean you're injured, does not mean you have a herniated disc, does not mean you have a spondy, doesn't mean you have a pinched nerve. It just says back pain. It's information, like being sore after heavy squats. In fact, you've been so sore likely from your squat session that if someone poured it into your body and felt that soreness, they would think you were dying. You must have rabies of the quads. Something is going on. We just tend to think differently or perceive information differently from our brains when the spine is, sensitized. So what do we do about that? So first and foremost, let's appreciate that pain doesn't mean injury, but where do we begin to untangle this? So what I'd love to do is take you through a couple ideas around getting things moving. So we all want that secret technique that just takes it off, and that's called drugs and alcohol and cocaine and opiates. And if you were looking for those things, you can definitely get the relief you're after. But when we're really trying to untangle back pain, one of the first things that we're about is trying to restore motion, at least identify motion that we may not have. So if you have ever dived in or seen the work that we've done and been with Mark Bell for a few decades now, it feels like a decade, at least a decade, longer than that. I remember when you were really skinny, Mark. And the idea here is first order of business is always to restore motion. And so what we're trying to always get to is, where do we put things first? And when we started thinking about how we were going to approach this in the world, we did something called the 10-minute squat test. Now the 10-minute squat test was really just a mnemonic to get people to spend more time in the bottom position of the squat. That's what it looks like on the surface, right? How do we get people spending time in this end range position? And if you follow Mark, you see that Mark has been working this in. And let me just say that when I met Mark, he struggled to put his shoes on. He was so immobile. We ended up coming up with a lot of ideas around working with big, strong power athletes because they couldn't get into some of these other shapes. So full shout out to Mark. But while most of us thought about this must be about my ankles or this may be about improving my squatting, secretly, one of the things that we get out of this 10-minute squat test is getting flexion back into the spine. Now, most of the strength athletes we know and most of the modern athletes we know are really extension driven, just as a function of the kinds of training we're doing and a function of the sitting that we're doing, sort of in between squat sets. A lot of times we see that our pelvises get cranked over. One of the things that Louis Simmons had really good success with the glute ham and the hyper, more importantly, less glute ham, more hyper, was he got the sacrum moving in the same direction as the pelvis. So typically when we're squatting heavy and we're moving or deadlifting or pulling, being athletic, the sacrum actually locks in to the sides of the pelvis and becomes more mechanically stable under more load. So those extension loads, boom, lock that thing into position. But we also need to unlock that thing into position. And what we can actually say is that you don't have a healthy spine unless you can flex your spine and extend your spine. And most of us, believe it or not, are missing some flexion. We don't even live there. We certainly try not to flex under enormous loads because this is less effective in short term. But ultimately, if we don't flex the spine, we're going to have an elbow that doesn't extend or a shoulder that doesn't rotate. So the normative language of the spine is having the ability to flex and extend. So one of the easiest ways to do this in a way that's holistic and doesn't take equipment and something you can work in is doing the 10-minute squat test. So don't worry about your feet. Try to get your feet as straight as you can here. That's actually important for the hips later on. But one of the things you can do in this 10-minute squat test is just grab onto something. And what I want you to appreciate is I want you not up on your toes. We don't care about your squatting. That's fine. I want your heels back so that you can round. And what I want you to do in this position, if you came into a shape where you could take a big breath, we can measure that. But more importantly, you can feel that it's a big breath. I want you to get into this position, holding on to something, and notice that my back has rounded. So I have this contiguous, beautiful round from my upper back to my low back. My pelvis is tucking under as it should be. I don't have to receive a huge weight and stand back up here. I'm trying to actually hang out in this bottom position. What I want you to do is think about keeping your belly button pulling towards your spine. You won't get injured if you don't, but you'll be able to take a bigger breath here. So what I'm really trying to do is just relax, and then every once in a while during this time, or every 20 seconds or so, see if you can take a massive breath and try to expand the tissues in your low back. Put your hand here, see if you can feel that expand as you breathe. I have to work hard to get those tissues to come on tension upstream. So what I'm really looking for is, can I get some end range motion in this and flexion, and then can I also breathe in this position? Back to the same amount I did if I was receiving a huge weight overhead or being stapled under a heavy front squat. But the bottom line is, first order of business is, let's get the spine moving. Let's tell the brain, hey, we actually have access to this full position. And that's going to begin to unlock it. You don't have to do 10 minutes all at once. You can do a minute here or there. Again, I'm not telling you to soften in the bottom of your squat. I'm not telling you that that's good technique. I'm not telling you that it's not okay to reverse, or that if you were trying to get stapled, you should have a spine that's well organized and handles axial load. What I'm telling you is that you should be able to take a poop in the woods. And it's an indicator of your back health that your ankles and hips may be keeping you from exposing yourself to this position because it's not a really great shape and you feel like you're going to fall over. But the first order of business is seeing if you can get some breathing and restoring your normal motion. That's part of the game. If your elbow was stuck bent and you came to me, you're like, my elbow hurts, and I was like, well, it's stuck bent, and you're like, yeah, it's stuck bent. That's got to be part of the problem. That would make intuitive sense. You need an elbow to flex and extend in order to be a normal elbow. Well, we need your spine to flex and extend, and more importantly, you need to be able to breathe into that spinal position. So first order of business, let's see if we can break this up. See if you can get into that bottom position throughout the day, hold on to something, get some breaths, get into the best shape available to you, let your spine relax, take some breaths. Again, that's what Louis was on with the reverse hyper. He figured out a way to get some traction loading into his big, strong athletes who couldn't get into this restorative position. Part of the way the body tunes itself is by being on the ground. That's part of the game. Cooking on the ground, sleeping on the ground, getting off the ground. A lot of these positions get lost because we don't dwell on the ground. And I'm glad we don't dwell on the ground. Appreciate that the first order of business of getting you out of back pain can be restoring these motions. And once we start doing that, then we can have the next conversation. See you guys next time.